Welcome back to another episode of Estate Planning Nightmares and How to Avoid Them. I'm your host, John Braddock, the author of Click Here When I Die and founder of My Life and Wishes, The Legacy Vault, an online planning and document storage solution created to make things easier for those you love. Say today, we're diving into a powerful and deeply personal conversation with someone who's turned his own family's estate planning nightmare into a mission to help others. So joining me today is David Mohrmann, an estate planning attorney and founder of Carolina Legacy Law Group. Now, David's journey into estate planning wasn't just a career choice. It was a calling that stemmed from the tragic and eye-opening experience of losing his father at just 49 years old. Through that experience, he saw firsthand the devastating impact of poor planning, lack of communication, and the traditional pitfalls of probate. Today, we're going to explore his personal story that shaped the way he practices law, the lessons he learned from his family challenges, and proper estate planning can prevent unnecessary stress, legal battles, and financial losses. David, thank you for being here.
Hey, John, good to see you.
Great to see you, my friend. Everything good in Charlotte, North Carolina?
Charlotte, first day of spring, I guess technically. But yeah, we're rocking and rolling, so it's all good.
All right. Well, our recording date is April 1st on this. Has anyone pranked you yet today?
There's a water machine in the office, and it had all these very gross flavors that uh it was like egg flavor, fungus flavor, and then you hit the button on the machine and it cleared out and it was like just fooling April's Fool. So I thought that was pretty funny because it did definitely take me off guard at a point. I was like, wait, that's an interesting flavor choice.
Oh, wow. Too funny. Too funny.
Yep.
I fortunately have not been pranked yet, but I'm sure
Well,
Michelle's
it's
got
still
something
early,
something
right?
planned for me before the day is done.
There
So
you go.
awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you here. I think we'll have a fun time. Um, And so I really appreciate you taking the time. And I usually start all my episodes by asking people about their passion, the why they do what they do and those kind of things. But I think from your introduction, we know what has sparked your passion. Your story is incredibly moving. And I know our listeners will relate to the challenges you faced or certainly can can glean some information. So to start, can you just share a little bit with us about your father's passing and how that experience shaped your path into estate planning?
Yeah, so my father was a former special forces officer in the Army. He was a small business owner. He loved myself and my older sister greatly. But at 47, he was diagnosed with one of the most rare forms of cancer in the world. The term is so long, I just don't even try to pronounce it. But it is the cancer of the valve of the liver. And then it spread throughout his body. In the very beginning, they said that it was, treatable. They never say curable, obviously, with cancer, but it was a treatable type of cancer. And he went through the chemos and the radiations. He was in the hospital for almost 2 years before his passing at 49. But he had enough wherewithal to at least speak with an attorney. He unfortunately used the same attorney that was representing him in his separation from my mom. And so, knowing my father and knowing what he would have wanted for myself and my older sister, he would have liked to heard some better options than the option that he got. But the attorney, charged the 3,500. Here's a very surface level will. So we went through the whole probate process. We were, limited with access to funds for quite some time that, we would have needed for schooling, helping my mom out now as a single mother. But yeah, that is the reason that I got into this because, I saw and experienced firsthand, what an incomplete plan is, right? I can't say that it was a bad plan, but looking back now, I have his documents still. I don't believe that he would have wanted it to go this way if he had the options all laid out in front of him. And that's what we make sure our clients have all the options available. And ultimately, we're just the guide, and they're the ones who select the best plan to achieve their objectives.
Right. So, to our listeners, see a specialist. It's if I need brain surgery, I don't think my internal medicine doc is going to be able to do that. And so, I understand, your dad, he's working with a family law attorney. Like, yeah, we can help you craft a will. It's like a lot of people say, I'm going to run to Costco and pick up a will kit and do it myself. But yeah, a lot of people think having a will is, yeah, I have a plan. Well, you
Mhm.
kind of have a plan, but it's very incomplete,
Yeah.
as you experienced. And as I think our listeners certainly know by now, a trust is designed to avoid probate.
Mhm.
A will does not avoid probate, which means the family oftentimes don't get the funds that they need until months, maybe years later, going through the process. And how old were you and your sister at the time, and what was the impact on your mom?
Yeah, my mom is a saint. Even though they were going through this, the separation at the same time of this treatment that my father was going through, she made it a point to bring us to the hospital every single day. Some people in that situation could have said, you know what, we're getting ultimately divorced. I'm not gonna, have my kids, you know, take it out on that person, if you will. But we went to the hospital literally every single day after school. Um, the emotional side of it is there's two sides of the emotional coin, right? You're watching your father who maybe had 8% body fat sit there in a hospital bed day in and day out, wither away. Um, and then you had the emotional side of the estate planning nightmare after the fact. Um, he could communicate okay, not really that great because of the toll that it took on his body. So that was pretty difficult to watch. But to go to your question, myself and my older sister, we were in our early teens and we were just watching this man who raised us, slowly succumb to this horrible, horrible disease. And we didn't know what we were going to be facing after the fact and some of the mysteries that were ultimately revealed after his passing, which is, one of those things that the communication is key to planning correctly. We always, make our clients aware that a communication with their family members and anybody else that might be involved in their plan is just critical. So they're not completely blindsided, when this does happen, because it is going to happen, right? John and I, we were kind of joking around with April Fools before, and you know, the inevitable, as much as you think it's not going to happen, it will eventually. And the communication while you're alive can absolutely lessen that effect as much as possible. Obviously, there's still going to be the emotional, turmoil that goes along with the passing of a loved one, but it doesn't need to carry over to the legal and the financial side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, I think my statistics are still pretty close that in the 300,000 years man has been on this planet, I think the odds are still 1 out of 1.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, the way I like to open up all the events, and I haven't had anybody disagree with me, but I always ask the question, raise your hand if you're gonna die. And, obviously 100% go up. I've never had that person sit on their hands yet, but who knows? There's probably that one person out there, banking on making it forever.
Yeah, I'll find a way before
Yep.
I die,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Well, isn't there like a Netflix show right now out for a guy who's like trying to live forever and he's spending millions and millions of dollars on all these procedures and medications and we're not built that way.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. You look at time and I talk about my parents who are, now 90 plus, still having a great, life, mentally sharp, they see their and always have their physicians every year. They get their checkups, everything's routine and do things. And, I mean, I think my mom's mother passed when she was like 66 years old because it was another time and medicine wasn't the way it is. But maybe sometime, it won't happen in our lifetime, David, but maybe they'll figure out a way to, make 120 the new 40. But,
Yeah, true.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that'd be nice, right?
yeah. So you alluded to things, and I don't know if you're comfortable with this or not, but I always like to say some secrets shouldn't be taken to the grave. And you talk about communication. I think it's critically important that you communicate things to family so when you die, they have time to mourn and grieve. But if all of a sudden now there's skeletons or things coming out of the closet that you didn't know, that can take a toll. You had mentioned that you'd found some things out.
Yeah. No, I'll talk about anything and everything. I always tell anybody that I'm sitting down with, I'm a complete open book. My story kind of reads like a Lifetime movie. So if Lifetime, you're picking up this podcast and you think it's pretty interesting, I'm available. And like maybe like uh the Hemsworths, one of them to play me in the movie. So, but
I can
anyway,
see the resemblance anyway already. So
yeah,
I mean, it's a natural fit.
absolutely. Let's say appreciate that. Um, yeah, so the skeletons in the closet definitely came dancing out. So my father, with his estate plan, names his brother, my uncle, as his everything from healthcare power of attorney to executor. Um, and my uncle took it upon himself to have him buried where my uncle wanted him to be buried. So, with my father's military status, we had the option to get a headstone in Arlington, which we did end up getting, but his actual remains were left with my uncle at his disposal. So my uncle, and I always knew, I don't even know how I remember this, but I always, knew that my father believed in cremation. Um, and so he was cremated. So that part wasn't really left out to wonder what happened. But for almost 20 years, I didn't know where his remains were actually spread or held or whatever happened with them, right? And so I finally asked my uncle pretty recently, where are these remains spread? And he said, "Oh, I have them in Lake Travis in Austin, Texas." And I kind of just thought to myself, well, Austin, Texas, we don't really have any connection there. We're from New Orleans. Um, why in Austin in Lake Travis? And he just basically said we had a great vacation there one time, just the two of us. And I felt like it would be a great place to have his remains. Now, because we were younger, I guess they didn't think to consult with, myself and my older sister about, hey, would you think this is a good place or where would y'all like him or would you like a portion of his remains or anything like that. So, there was a good amount of time that it was just kind of swept under the rug, you know. No pun intended with cremains, but it really was just swept under the rug, and no one spoke about it. Um, a couple years after my father passed away, my mom got remarried. I'm very blessed to have a dad on this earth again. Um, he raised me as his own, and I give him full credit without taking anything away from my biological father. But I was very curious about, this type of legal process at that age. And I went to my grandparents' house and I asked them, can I take a look at my father's estate plan? And my grandfather, very old school at that point, gosh, Papa was probably 87, 88, kind of set in his ways and just kind of said, well, David, what are you planning on learning out of this? Why are you going to do this? What's going on? So I just want to see. I have questions, right? I just want to see. I think honestly, it was kind of like I think it was an attempt to kind of get to know my father um, by reading his plan, if I could glean anything out of it. But anyway, there wasn't anything that really jumped out. Oh, wait, I forgot. Except the fact I learned I had a half brother through his estate plan. So I'm sitting there at, 12, 13 years old, and the height of emotions are, already there because I'm going through puberty, and I'm reading his will, and it says I leave behind three children, and I had to go back and I leave behind three children. I leave behind three children, and the first child that was listed was Gregory Mohrmann, and my father's name was Gary, so there was a little, symbolism there. So I remember reading it, and he was, gosh, maybe 17, 18 years older than me. And so I remember sitting at my grandfather's kitchen table vividly and looking up and saying, Papa, who's Greg Mormon? Who's this guy? And he had just like looked down and very just matter of fact said, no one told you you have a half brother. I'm just like, holy smokes. No, no one told me that. Don't you think that should have been brought up a while ago? Not when, someone passes away, but just in, kind of everyday conversation. So that's one of those things that, you learn on paper and you're just kind of, I remember my parents lived pretty close to my grandparents' house. And I remember just like riding back on my bike, just full of emotion, obviously crying because I didn't really know what else aren't they telling me, and it just the breakdown of the communication after that. And I understand it, now that I'm a little bit older, I understand my grandparents buried their, middle-aged child, which no one should ever have to do. My uncle lost his, only brother, his best friend that, no one should really ever have to do. No one should do. And then obviously I lost my parent there. So I understand where they were coming from, where it was very like, okay, it happened. We're just going to continue going on, move on. But looking back now and having helped folks as we do, I make it a point to say, look, just communicate with people. Talk about that you have a plan. You don't need to go into detail about who's getting what and what amounts, who's going to serve in what roles, unless you want to, obviously. And we always offer to facilitate that conversation in our family meetings, and we have them regularly. We do them over Zoom, and I always tell them, look, you can put the burden on me. Tell them, the big bad attorney said that this is the way that we have to do it or whatever, because it is a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation that, I hear it all the time. I trust this child with my money. I trust this child with my health. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with people serving in different roles. but the communication for sure is there, because what's going to happen is when that person is called upon to act on the money side, they're going to wonder, why didn't I get called upon to act on the health side? And vice versa. I get called upon to act on the health side, but they don't trust me with their money. So we want to make sure there isn't any of that animosity there. And it's, a great conversation to have. You get it straight from the horse's mouth from mom and dad. And if you need any explanations, I'm there, but I think, the communication is something that we really pride ourselves on for the firm itself. And I know folks who come on and speak with you, John. I think we all take estate planning personally. Now, it might not have personally happened to them, and I'm not saying that you need to lose a loved one, a parent, to be a really great estate planner. But, the commonalities that I see with folks in this industry is that, they usually have had some type of event, that they personally went through. And, they're wanting to make sure that what they went through doesn't happen to someone else, if they can make sure that, it's completely avoidable. And it is. It is avoidable to have that emotional baggage go along with something. We can't stop the inevitable, but we can, at least reduce the emotional side of things as much as possible with proper planning and communication.
Absolutely. And you touch on really good points that, Michelle and I have 6 children between us. And uh, so if, yeah, with all due respect to my daughters who are listening right now, um, they're not going to be my healthcare power of attorney. We're
Mhm.
second behind Michelle, obviously, um, because it's more emotional. You know, if there's any chance Daddy could live, well, I don't want to be Terry Schiavo,
Mhm.
uh, and and have battles, right? And so one of the boys who are more rational might be saying, "This is what Dad wants
Yep.
in this document, and let's get it done." But I also think, like you said, I think it's critical to explain to them ahead of time. This is why
Mhm.
um, I'm pointing you, and getting back to the some secrets shouldn't be taken to the grave. Making sure families know about things. I think the only secrets you should have from the family, or surprises that they should have at the end, is wow,
Absolutely.
Dad or Mom had a nice estate, and they put a lot of things away for us to make life
Mhm.
easier. That's the
Yep.
kind of surprises I'd like to see happen for people.
Yeah, a couple of your points, with not having your daughter serve in various roles because of the emotional side of things. Um, when we sit down with folks and we do the design of their plan, I always tell them, I'm not asking you questions to second guess you. I'm asking the questions to make sure that you're comfortable with those answers, right? And I ask them a lot of times, especially when they're naming, 18-year-olds as healthcare powers of attorney, are those children going to be emotionally stable enough to adhere to your directive and not prolong anything, not get any type of court involvement because the directive says one thing and they want to do one thing. And, so we always talk through that. But, you're absolutely correct that there are certain people that can handle things differently, not necessarily better, but just differently. And so we also like to say, as you were talking about, having this nice plan and this inheritance taken care of, we always say, if your loved ones never asked 2 questions, you did your job. And to us, those 2 questions are, I wonder why John didn't do this when he could have, A. And then I wonder if this is what John would have wanted us to do, B. So there's two questions. One you can handle obviously while you're alive. Well, both you can handle while you're alive, but one's, questioning, why don't you just get this done when you could have? And then after the fact, it's kind of left up to a guessing game. Did John want to be cremated or buried? I don't know. Just toss him in a box, right? Does John have, any indications on what kind of life support he wants? No, just keep him on a, artificial life support like Terry Schiavo and go, gosh, like 10 years or something like that and get the United States Supreme Court involved. I was very young at that. But I remember vividly, it was nightly news and my parents would turn in and say, "Oh, I can't believe this is still going on." And I can't remember exactly what it was, but her husband wanted one thing, and then her parents wanted another thing, and the one thing that they were talking about just wasn't even spoken about in anything that she had. And yeah, it's one of those things where we like to say estate planning is an A to Z process. We also liken it to a puzzle. Until you have all the pieces in that puzzle, you're just not going to see that picture. But yeah, that's really, and it's great that you have the right people in your family that can handle those things for you and your wife.
Right. And for the listener, if you're not familiar with Terry Schiavo, you could look it up. I believe it's spelled Schiavo. It's close. Yeah, it's a sad story. A fairly young couple. They were married. They didn't have any children. She actually had some kind of a brain aneurysm or something that occurred, dropped her to her knees into the hospital. She went. She was on life support, no brain activity, nothing going on. The husband, of course, they had no estate plan, wanted her to be taken off of life support. The mother and father of Terry did not. And this
Mhm.
turned into a 10 plus year legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And finally, the husband was granted the right. So if anyone listening, if you're a married couple and you don't have healthcare power of attorney, and especially if you're a young couple, get it done. And again,
Yeah.
as I always
Yeah.
say, the reason to talk to a professional estate planning attorney and not try and do this yourself is much like David was just saying. The professional estate planning attorney can ask you the questions. They can make you think through. They've seen it all, and you don't know the what ifs. Well, what if this?
Mm.
You know.
I like to claim that I am a quasi therapist, because you are speaking with folks and some will go down the rabbit hole and, what if this, what if that, what if this, what if that? And, we try to, there's only so many things that we can plan for, but there is, a lot of coddling, so to speak, to talk about this. Most people don't want to talk about it. It's not on the top of their quote priority list to talk about it. But at the same time, it's on the top of their priority list to do. So it's kind of a weird, they know they need to do it, but they don't want to talk about it. Some people believe that if you talk about it, it's going to happen to you, which is, a super silly superstition, but it's better to do because with that said, 2 years ago, folks came in, let's get planning done. The male, John, you and I were talking about how the males in these relationships are always kind of the more bullheaded, right? Nothing's gonna happen to us. We're He-Man, whatever. And he just said, hey, we're gonna come back to you when the time is right. And I can go down timing in a completely, 2 hour long episode, right? But I got a call from her about 2 weeks after that and said, hey, look, I don't care what he said. We're going to come in probably like in the next week or two. We're going out of town for his birthday. What's going to come next. They go out of town, they get in a car accident, and he passes away. We're coming up on year two in the probate. And, it wasn't even a large estate value wise that went through probate, but just here in Mecklenburg County in North Carolina, um, you know, 9 to 16 months is the average. Like I tell everybody, it can be shorter, it can be longer. I don't know. I'm not the clerk of court. And they think that there is literally a button that I can press that just speeds it along. And that unfortunately is not the situation.
You can't get the judge to push you up on the docket just by calling.
Right, right, right. And there's no staples button, the easy button, that you can press. But yeah, it's wild.
But I love your philosophy because you know the documents are critically important, but it's not necessarily just about the legal documents. It's what they do. It's
Hmm.
about protecting families, protecting relationships, because so often, and you've seen this, families get divided, right? I always say divide things, not families.
Yeah.
And you know, and for our listeners, sorry you get to hear it another time. Again, having 6 kids, we couldn't agree on where to go to dinner, what movie to watch. If people falsely think that their kids, when I die, are going to just agree, well, yeah, you have that and I'll have this, and then deal with the money,
Hmm.
never happened.
No,
Never happened.
no.
So
We liken probate to a divorce among siblings. That's what I like to think about it as. That's I think the easiest way for folks to understand, like, oh gosh, this is going to drive a wedge between our family if we don't do it right. Like I said, or we can't take the sting away from the passing of the loved ones, but we can minimize any sting after the fact with proper planning. So yeah, the stuff is definitely what gets the most people.
yeah, exactly. So I love this, David. You took these painful experiences, used them to as fuel, right? To build Carolina legacy law. And it's interesting because you're not Mohrmann and Associates. You're not, Smith, 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 and Smith.
Hmm.
Carolina legacy law. So you've taken a different approach to naming the firm. Can
Yep.
you just share a little philosophy on that?
The philosophy is that it's not about me. Um, I'm the guide. I have the experience, the education to get you to where you want to go. But ultimately, it's all about the families that we help. Um, Andrew and Angela yesterday, Brian and Isabel on Friday. These are all people in the Carolinas that are building this legacy. It's not about me. It's not about, what I've achieved, what I've gone through. From day one, I always made it a point that when I started my own firm, it was going to be about the people that I served. Um, the firm got started after COVID, 2019, 2020. I was working for a firm that was very generalized. We've already talked about going and seeing someone who specializes in specific areas of law, but this was a very generalized firm. And at the time, I was working on construction defense, right? Insurance defense for construction projects. 2020 comes around, they see a lucrative practice area to add. And so I remember like the first 3 or 4 clients come in, I'm underneath the partner, and I kind of just pull them aside and I said, look, I don't think this is the right type of plan for these people. Like, I'm pretty sure there are better options out there for them in terms of their objectives. And, it was very document oriented. Here is your will, and here is your healthcare power of attorney. And I remember asking him, I said, I think there's better ways of doing this. What do you think? And he just flat out said, this is the way I was taught. This is the way that we're going to continue to do it. And it didn't sit right with me. So 21, that's when I went out on my own. And as you said, from very day one, there is no I am, like I said, the guide. You ask me to bring you um, uh, to New Orleans, where I'm from originally. I know the way, right? But you're the one that has to say, "Hey, let's stop along the way, and go visit Atlanta, and let's go see, what's Mobile like until we get to the ultimate destination." But that's all I see myself as, is that person that can guide you with the right questions and obviously getting to your objective. But yeah, it's never been about David Mohrmann. I'm just your friendly attorney.
Well, I love it, and clearly you're doing all the right things, because anyone wants to check out David's Google reviews and things of that nature. I mean, he's crushing it, and we've probably known each other probably coming up on 3 years, I would think,
Hmm.
and it's
Yep,
been fun for me to see what you've been doing, and your activity on social and LinkedIn and those kind of things. So
I appreciate
congratulations
that.
on
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
So your insights have been truly that invaluable. And before we wrap up, if anyone listening wants to work with you or find out more, how can they find you?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, you put me on the spot. I gotta remember what our all our socials are and everything. Carolina Legacy Law Group, carolinalegacylaw.com, um, Carolina Legacy Law on Instagram. We have some pretty good information up there. We've kind of taken a little bit of a break from posting there, but go ahead and search on LinkedIn, David Mohrmann. That's the only time that you'll be searching David Mohrmann. But that's where I do most of the postings, just to educate everybody. That's the whole thing, is that we were talking earlier before the show started about, people don't know what they don't know. I heard recently that they just recently included taxes in high school curriculums in some schools recently. And I think it's probably a good thing to include, other sides of adult shit, if you call it that, right? This is one of those things that you have the ability to take responsibility of, and you should, to make sure that your wishes are fulfilled, right? So it's not just left up to the state, or to somebody that, doesn't know you from Adam, or just doesn't know anything about you, right? So I always tell folks that I pivoted, even though I was truly called to this area of law, because it's one of those only, I think, areas of law that you're actually proactive in. All other types of law, at least in my experience, has all been reactionary. It's somebody did this 20 years ago or whatever, let's do something about it. Or someone's blaming me for something that happened 20 years ago. And like I was sharing with the construction defense, these guys are working, you know, 14, 15 hours a day. They don't remember what they did last week. So to sit down and have conversation with folks that, trying to help them from years back, I said, there's got to be a little bit more of a law that really vies with my personality. And the state planning is that area that is very proactive, um, and you're just helping people. I mean, honestly, the amount of people that leave our sessions, and you can literally see it in their shoulders, kind of just relax and drop some. It's like, huh, I got this taken care of. This is great. I don't really need to worry about anything right now other than who's going to win the final four at this moment. And it's one of the, honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better career in helping folks, and, using my unfortunate event to just help people. But like I've said, I was blessed with, a second dad, right? And I got blessed with a career that I can, share all these things, and this passion of mine of helping folks. So yeah, it's been really rewarding.
No, I love that. You're absolutely right. I mean, estate planning is, in my opinion as well, the only area of law that's proactive. Everything else is reactive. Everything else
Mhm.
is designed to win fights. Um, Estate planning is designed to prevent.
Yeah,
So it's kind of a, for me, it's a happy place. So
absolutely.
anyway, to make it super easy for our listeners, in the show notes below, all David's
There you go.
contact information is going to be there. You can click, you can find him, reach out. He's a really cool guy because, as you know, I only talk to really cool people on this show.
I
I want to
appreciate
thank,
those kind words.
oh,
I think I'm cool.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I know all your clients do. So, and I want to thank all our listeners for joining us again. Hey, if you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, and by all means, share this with someone that needs to hear it. And until next time, remember, your life is your legacy. So plan ahead and make it a great day.